This session has been organised. It came about around the idea of doing something in memory of Mo Mowlam. And Mo Mowlam was my stepmum. You will all know her as the Northern Ireland Secretary who died in 2005 from a brain tumour. She was hugely influential, as you know, in bringing about peace in Northern Ireland and getting the Good Friday Agreement signed. But she also has a very personal relationship with this city. Mo was brought up in Coventry. She grew up in Coventry. She went to school here and always talked about Coventry very fondly as home. So we thought it was very appropriate to do something in memory of Mo here at Rising this year. I'm going to tell you a couple of stories about what I remember from Mo of her time here in Coventry that she told me about. Mo was my stepmom from when I was 8 until I was 25. She was my other mum. We were very, very close, and a lot of her family are still here in Coventry. She told me two stories that I've always remembered. One is that where I think a lot of her political values came from and where she first sort of started to get angry. And one was from her school days. Mo was a very, very keen hockey player at school. She was one of the first comprehensives in the UK, I think that's right. And Mo would go off to play hockey at different schools. And she told me a story about how she went to play hockey in these other schools, and these other schools had really good fields, really good equipment, really good, the kits. And Mo got very, very angry because her school didn't have those things. And she started to see that there was an unfairness, and she couldn't understand why these schools had it and her school didn't. So I think that for her was a really early, really simple moment where she saw that things weren't fair and things weren't equal. And another story she used to tell about Coventry was the Lady Godiva statue. And she got very frustrated with the fact it had been just left, and it had got really dirty and really run down. And she felt that this was, for such an important statue in the city, this was a really bad thing, that it had become like this, and it was representative of so much more. So she organised for a group to go down and to clean the statue. And Mo helped to clean the statue to make it shiny again. So they're my two Mo in Coventry stories. And we can talk a bit more about her later. But I think it's a very poignant moment to be having this conversation about women in politics. This whole morning really has been about hugely influential, amazing, important women who have changed the world in their own ways. Listening to the panel earlier about Jo Cox and in memory of Jo was very moving, and a lot of what was being said reminded me, in the way Jo sounds like she approached things, of Mo, and not just the four-letter words, but the kind of belief in equality and human rights. And so that's one reason it's very important we talk about women in politics. Another is obviously something that we're all talking about at the moment with the US election and what's happened recently in America. And I think watching that campaign was fascinating. And there are lots of reasons why what happened last week, and why the decision made to elect Trump. But I think something that really stood out for me as a woman, and watching Hillary, who was a good friend of Mo's, running that campaign, was the rhetoric and the dialogue around the role of women, and the fact that they were talked about either as sexual objects to be possessed, or they were talked about, or Hillary was talked about, like a sort of witch. And it became a witch hunt, and that kind of fear and hatred that was used in the campaign, which meant that there was very little room for having conversations about policy and politics and values and beliefs. And I think whatever the other reasons, and I think it's time to listen, I think we're at a point in time where it's time to listen as much as it is to try and change things, to why we are where we are with Brexit and where we are with the US and all over the world. I think that rhetoric around women is very scary. And it's not just women, it's lots of other groups of people. So that is why today it's very exciting that we have these three people here with us, and we are going to have a conversation about women's role in politics. Rhoda Ibrahim is from the Coalition of Peace in Africa. Stella Creasy is Labour MP for Walthamstow. And Maria Cahill is the former senator in Ireland. So I'm now going to hand over to Rhoda, who is going to say a few words.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me first to this very valuable conference. And it's actually based on my very experience and the work I was doing for the last almost 30 years. And I first came to this country in 1989. And I came here to study women and development at Sussex University. And while I was doing, my country, Somalia, collapsed. So I stayed another 1 year until my visa was expired, and I asked asylum. I stayed 3 years, but as soon as I got my permission, I went back to take part the reconstruction and the rehabilitation of then Somaliland. Somaliland became independent, and I really wanted to contribute. So I joined it again with the international organization, first with UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, in Djibouti as a consultant for women and children refugees in Djibouti. And then I went to Yemen, and I just felt I have to go to Somaliland and contribute. So I joined CIIR, who is no longer there now, after 75 years, as their first development worker to work with local NGOs in Somaliland who were just emerging at the time. And local NGO formation was just a new concept to all the Somalis then, as the country was one party system before. And they also has to cope with the complete destruction of the country. And the people who formed NGOs were the most educated, who didn't have job then, and who had the opportunity to liaise with the international organizations. But the first thing that they asked me at the time when I went back was, they really want how to get over this war. We don't have any idea. We don't know any. If you know any country who collapsed completely and getting off from that destruction, do you know anywhere? So I have to come back to my organization. So I became a resource person for the local organizations. We have mobilized trainings and exchange of tours between any country around the world that we can think who had similar experience. So we sent pairs of people, of 2 people each time, to Namibia, who just got their independence at the time, Eritrea, South Africa, Guatemala, El Salvador for the mobilization and reconstruction then. And also RTC, actually in Birmingham. That's where I got my training, was in Birmingham, Woodbrook, responding to conflict in Birmingham. So that's how COBA then came about, Coalition of Peace in Africa. I am one of the founders. I am also focal point for the Horn of Africa, based in Hargeisa, in charge of Djibouti, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, to provide skills and tools for conflict transformation and peace building. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. They say that you can tell how important a politician is by how long it takes to organise to get them at something like this. So if you were to have Barack Obama, probably next year, it'll take you a year to organise, I'd imagine. Theresa May, good 6 months. But when Hen texted me this morning and said, look, what are you doing later? Will you come up to Coventry? I thought I'd love to come, not least because your stepmum was an absolute inspiration for my generation of women getting involved in the labour movement in the late 1990s because she stuck out. And actually, one of the things I think when I reflect about women in politics, not just in my own political movement, but across the piece, is whether we've actually made much progress in the last 15 or indeed 20 years. And I was reflecting back on things that people had said about Mo, and I found a wonderful quote where somebody had complained that she was a bloody, ratchety woman who couldn't settle. And I thought, gosh, I'd like that to be my epitaph. I really would. The reality of being involved in politics in this country as a woman is that we are fighting an illusion that we have equality. There's a wonderful study done by Gina Davis, which shows that if a room has 20% women in, the men think it's 50-50. And if it has 33% women in, the men think there's more women than men. Public life is very much like that. That's not just in politics, it's across the media, it's across academia, it's across business, it's across our judiciary, where actually women are taking up around 20% of leadership positions. I work in a place where there are still more men today than there have ever been women politicians in this country, if you think about that as a process. So one of the challenges for us is how do we bring the different experiences that we have to bear on the problems and challenges that our communities face, whilst also fighting that inequality in of itself. I'm very struck by something Margaret Thatcher used to complain about, where she was in the shadow cabinet in the 1970s, and she was expected to be what she called the every woman. So she was one woman there, expected to speak for every single woman. I now represent a very diverse part of London called Walthamstow. I like to call it God's own country, not just to annoy those people from Yorkshire, but also because we have people from every community around the world. The idea that I, as one woman, could represent the diversity of experiences, of insight, of input that those people in my community, let alone the women in my community, could make, doesn't ring true to me. Yet still, I get asked whether Margaret Thatcher inspired me to go into politics, to which I always reply, well, did Silvio Berlusconi inspire you? We have a long way to go to see the range of contribution that women can bring to our public life. And as a result, we all miss out. One of the challenges I think we have in getting this right and understanding why we have to fight what is frankly a backlash against that diversity is understanding that equality isn't about the people left out of the room. It's actually about the benefits that come from diverse experiences coming together, sharing ideas, sparking off each other, and contributing to a better life. Societies that are more equal are more prosperous, they're more interesting, everybody benefits from it. And I think one of the challenges that I reflect on from what I learned as a young student being around Mo, mainly on a dance floor at the Labour Party conference, was the energy that she brought to people being around her, but also that sense that she was unique. We will have made progress when we see every single woman in public life in her own right and through her own contribution and as part of a diverse, rich fabric of our country and what we can do. I'm afraid we're a long way to go, but it's events like this and panels like this that give me great hope that we can get there.
Thank you.
You can also tell how important a female politician is, certainly by how they're able to speak without notes. So I'm quite happy that Stella went in front of me because she's stolen my speech. My name is Maria. I grew up in West Belfast, which is a Sinn Féin Republican stronghold in Northern Ireland, or the north of Ireland, depending on what divide you're born on. Barriers are right there from the start. 52.6% of people are on benefits. 42.7% of children are classed as living in poverty. We have the second highest crime rate in the north, the highest cancer rate in Northern Ireland. You're less likely to go on to higher education if you're born in the place that I'm born in. Now, if you add to that mix that I'm also a female and a sexual abuse victim, the odds were exactly stacked in my favour. If you listen to some of the online misogynistic invective, I am a lying psycho bitch. I'm an evil woman. I'm either too fat or too thin. My hair's never sitting right. My weight is constantly a source of amusement. I'm either pregnant or I'm not, depending on what Twitter feed you look at, depending on what class I am. I have been described as white trash. I've also won a Woman of the Year award. I was awarded the Thirst for Justice Award by the Irish Labour Party last year. And the reason that I mention some of those comments is that most of the barriers, I think, in relation to females, certainly in Ireland at the minute, are really stacked along some of that online horrendous campaign of abuse. And I know that Stella in particular has both spoken publicly about it but has also suffered from it. I'm probably the only politician or former politician with a locked Twitter account, and I don't know how you're supposed to conduct yourself in relation to campaigning with an account that no one can retweet. But, you know, people before, like Mo, didn't have a Twitter account. Joan Burton has just recently discovered Twitter after keeping herself away during a very bruising election campaign for the Irish Labour Party. Part of the reason why some of the online abuse came my way is because I spoke out about the Republican movement in Ireland, and I really fell into politics by accident. I became a senator because a space arose in the Irish Senate, but mostly because I had been a public figure for the previous 2 years, and that because I spoke around my sexual abuse of myself as a teenager by a prominent IRA man who had married into my family and who lived in Belfast. And I spoke about the subsequent cover-up of that abuse when the IRA forced an internal investigation into it, an illegal investigation. 2 investigations actually, and the first one culminated in the IRA bringing me into a room to face my abuser, where they then said that they would read both of our body language to determine who was telling the truth. The second investigation culminated when the abuser was actually moved out of the country, and he actually came to Birmingham originally and then moved to London. And I found that a very difficult time in my formative teenage years. At a time when Mo was over negotiating the Good Friday Agreement, I was being brought to rooms in Belfast almost on a nightly basis for months to be questioned repeatedly about my sexual abuse. So I think it's very good sometimes that we can have, I think Mo was the first female Secretary of State to come to Ireland. I didn't always agree with everything that she said, but I do think that her down-to-earth demeanour and the way in which she interacted with people actually broke down a lot of barriers for young females coming through the system like myself. Once I made a police complaint, and it was safe enough to do so, and I should say that I also publicly spoke about meeting Gerry Adams, who was the head of Sinn Féin, for a period of 6 years while I tried to work out my own feelings in relation to the abuse, and also try and work out where my abuser had gone to and if I was going to bump into him in the future. And I went to the police in 2010. I made a police complaint. A 4-year court case ensued. It collapsed. I received an apology from the Director of the Public Prosecution Service because Sir Keir Starmer was brought over to do a review, and he found that there were serious failings on my behalf. And I mention all of this because it's very difficult, I think, sometimes for people to understand just how difficult it can be for someone to make a transition from a personal, private life into the public domain and then into the political arena. So I made a documentary with the BBC. I told of my experience, and a tsunami of wall-to-wall media coverage ensued for 2 years. And that then opened up an opportunity to go into the Irish Senate, which is exactly what I did. And I think not only is it difficult to go in as a female into a political arena, it's also very difficult when you have been in the public domain talking about an issue such as domestic violence or sexual abuse, because I think that people sometimes then put you in a box, they label you, and they think that you can have an opinion on that because that's what your experience is, but don't dare have an opinion on anything else. You know, don't have an opinion on childcare, for example. Don't have an opinion on war. Certainly, you know, don't have an opinion on what most of the prominent males in Ireland are talking about at that time, which was the economy. You know, and God forbid you have any knowledge of foreign policy or investment or any of those things. So I think that was quite difficult for myself. However, having said that, I found the Senate a very welcoming place, even if the online world wasn't. My colleagues in the Irish Labour Party were fantastic. I had excellent role models to look up to when I went in, and also to seek guidance from. So, for example, Joan Burton, the former Taoiseach, Francis Fitzgerald, who was then the Justice Minister and who now has become the Taoiseach, people like Mo, as I've said, from previous life. We also have, whether you agree with our politics or not, we have a female Prime Minister at the minute. We had a previous female Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, again, whether you agree with her politics or not. I happen not to. But she still managed to shatter that glass ceiling in relation to her gender, and also competently carry out her job, depending on what side of the fence that you're sitting on. I did want to talk a little bit about the presidency campaign, but I think we'd probably leave that until somebody else has given their opinion on it. But just to say this, I found my time in the Senate a really enjoyable one. I got into some rows. I do think yesterday morning's talk by Joyce Bandu was probably, if I had been able to say anything that hit the nail on the head, the education part of that is key. It is one of the things which opens up a pathway for females in no matter what role in life they want to go into. So if you provide an opening into education, you can certainly empower young women in particular to believe that they have the opportunity to go forward to do whatever it is in life that they want to do. So while we've spoken about the barriers, I do think that once one person starts to break those down, it becomes much more easy for someone else to then go into that role. Where it then becomes a problem, Stella, and I think you may have found this, is that when you are opinionated and you start to voice those opinions, it can sometimes take a bit longer for your male counterparts to actually realise that your opinion is probably as equal and as valid, and sometimes better than theirs. And I don't like reducing things to gender, but it is the reality. And I do think that having come through the journey of myself from the personal into the political, I've seen quite starkly on both sides how it can be both very encouraging to someone, but also very damaging and emotionally draining, I think, also. And I'm almost reluctant to admit that, because I know the next thing that will happen is that I will probably get comments online about either being too strong in dismissing the gender angle or being too weak in admitting that I have feelings. So again, these are things, and they're things that need to be tackled, and they can be, and it is an ongoing process. And I'm going to shut up now and hand back.
No, don't shut up.
To him.
Thank you very much, all of you. The thing that really stood out, one of the things that really stood out from what you were all saying was about the conflict of being a woman, and how when you take a leadership role as a woman, you're so conscious of being a woman in a way that I wonder if men are conscious of being men and leaders. And I think we were having a conversation this morning. We're staying in the same hotel, and we were having a conversation, Maria and I, this morning, about this in a different way. And I was talking about having my perspective on Mo, because I was an 8-year-old when she came into my life. She brought me up. And I remember when things happened, major political events happened, and I saw them at home, and I saw her reaction before she went into work or stood in front of the camera, and she was my stepmom first. And one of the stories that really stands out for me is when the Omar bomb happened, and we were actually on holiday, and the phone rang, and Mo was told that the bomb had gone off, and she immediately responded with, "I need to get back, I need to get there now." We were in Greece. "I need to get out of here, I need a plane, I need to go back." And there was quite a lot of toing and froing with the men that she was working with, because they sort of wanted to get there first. And so there was a stonewalling. They stopped the plane getting to her so that the men could get there first. So she was furious, and she was storming around. But after she left, I went into the bathroom, and there was a snake on the bathroom floor. And I'm terrified of snakes, and my dad was even more terrified of snakes. And so I went into the kitchen and said to my dad, I'm going to get in the car now because there's a snake in the bathroom and I'm not coming back till it's gone. And his reaction was then to drink half a bottle of ouzo to try and build up the courage to get rid of the snake. Now, Mo is the only person that could have dealt with that situation. We needed Mo because Mo was not scared of snakes. And for me, the reason I'm telling this story is because there's the personal and there's the human and there's the other roles women play and men. But something that really stood out for me this morning was when we were talking about the memories of Jo Cox. And the first thing that was said was she was a mum to those 2 little kids. And I think that we have to remember that, because I think what you often see is that used as an attack on women. I mean, look at the leadership, the election with Theresa May, the whole conversation around her being a mother, people or her not being a mother, and what impact that had and what that meant. And so I think this whole constant dilemma and conflict about weakness and how weakness is perceived and how women can be attacked because they're emotional, they're weak, they're mothers, they're all of that. So I think I'd really like to throw that back to you guys. And
it's
ask
also
what you think about
your physiology, full stop, though. I've spent the summer campaigning about the children in Calais, and I was regularly told I was doing that because I don't have any children of my own, and obviously I was making up for that fact. But I've also been told that things I wear, so that the Sun took great exception to me asking questions about the No More Page 3 campaign whilst wearing a vinyl skirt. But somehow, this is the height of impropriety to be wearing something that they considered to be sexually provocative. It's just fashion, and maybe I was a bit too old for it, but in a public place. So one of the things about this is that that is not unique to public life. Women face these descriptions, these discussions all the time. The question for us is, how do we call it out? Because actually it stops people coming forward. And the thing that's breaking my heart now, I dread to think, what it would have been like for Mo in the age of social media. I think she probably would have done a lot of selfies, because, we were all trying to take photos of on the dance floors with her. But actually, the scrutiny and the ability to control people, it's not about social media itself, it's about another form of communication to transmit questions about inequality. And it is a question about inequality. If I see another headline, there was a headline recently that suggested that Nicola Sturgeon and Theresa May were negotiating over Brexit via the medium of how high their shoes were. But that was coming through social media, because you can spread an idea and you can spread a frame of reference that this is what matters about women, just as you see it happening. The Daily Mail attacked the judges in the Article 50 case. One of them is apparently a rampant feminist who doesn't like marriage.
I'd like to be a rampant feminist.
Well, I just don't really think you can be a casual feminist, to be honest. I think, you're either in or you're out, really, with feminism. But there is a set of stories and reference points that we use about women that are so ingrained in society, sometimes we don't even see them. And we also have to be honest, sometimes other women will promote them too. The idea that it is about whether you're a mother or not, what you wear, whether you're trying to be sexually provocative, whether you're trying to attention seek. That actually my male colleagues, and I suspect your male colleagues, would not get the same kind of frame of reference as a starting point before you've even opened your mouth.
I think also practically, I have a 6-year-old daughter. I'm a single mother. And I think practically in terms of even parliamentary sittings, sometimes you can start very early in the morning. You can have, depending on what legislation that you're voting on, it can go on quite late into the evening. And I was commuting daily from Belfast to Dublin, so it's a 2.5-hour drive. So I would get up, leave her. My mother then would bring her to school, and I sometimes wouldn't be back then until 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning to get up at 6 to go back down again. Now, thankfully, not all the time, but 3 days a week, that can take quite a chunk out of your ability then to be there as a parent all the time. And one of the things that the Irish Parliament are looking at the minute is changing things like sitting times, so that they will get 1 day, fixed day a week off, and also not run so late into the evening, or else chunk it into just 3-day sittings, so that mothers and fathers can have some time to go back to be with their children. And I think there are things like that which could be quite easily put into place, both in Westminster and also in Stormont and in Dublin, that can make it much easier to break down that barrier for females in particular to go into the political arena.
Can I ask you all a question? What do you feel, looking at the landscape that we have in front of us and things that have happened recently and this discussion around women, what do you feel is the right approach to take? What do you think we should be doing next?
Okay, I would really say first something about my experience. When I first went back to Somaliland in 2004. It was 1994. And when I was approached by the CIR to go there and be their development worker, I really didn't want to go because there's these rumors that the Islamization is getting high and there are extremists, and I was just a young woman with no scarf at the time and partying sometimes when I feel like it, and I really refused it first. But after 6 months, the position was still open and I have to go there. And what happened is I went to Djibouti and then I went to Somaliland just to go there and come back and see what's happening. And I really found out that it is really I was more welcome than anyone else. First, I came from abroad. People were so desperate for peace. They wanted a link. And it worked for me as a woman even to travel to the regions, because when the war breaks everything, there's no communication of each other. It's easier for a woman to actually go to that clan and talk to them or take a message. And in eastern regions of Somaliland, it is really well documented. The first barriers of peace, of war, and those that men used at the time was the woman. They sent the woman, they were married from the inter-clans, really. So it was an advantage in that aspect. For the current climate, for the current situation, I am still processing, really.
Yes.
What could happen, because it is unbelievable that kind of a thing can happen, this part of the world, that you see it as always looking to up, that changes are coming. So I really I don't know what to say about that.
I think that's a really interesting point, that it's happening, we're in this part of the world.
Exactly, yeah.
And how do we now look at the world as a whole and talk about the fact that this part of the world seems to be going backwards. And actually, as you said earlier, it's almost been a myth that on some level there's been enormous progress, and yet not quite as much as maybe was previously assumed, which has allowed it to go back. So looking at both sides now in a different way.
Yeah, and practically it's where the messages are mostly coming from us. I started as a woman and development worker, and then the gender, you call it gender issues and all these things, and that was 20-something years ago, and now, yeah, it's whether it's working in here or not, it's really another question. So I'm still processing. I said it.
And I think that's a very fair and important point to make. Actually, one of the challenges, I think, for anyone I would consider myself to be a progressive is that we probably took for granted that Martin Luther King was right when he said that the moral arc of the universe bends towards progress. Actually, it is contested, and I think some of the way forward will be about learning from some of the work that's gone in other countries about how you actually work with communities. Actually, there is a sense in which it is right that it has come a very top-down perspective, that this is what progress, this is what the future should look like, and we haven't won the argument with people, and we have to have the respect enough. I agree with everyone is very distraught. I was at the Fawcett Society conference this weekend, and a lot of women were very, very angry, very, very disappointed on behalf of Hillary Clinton, but also very concerned about the divisions that we're now seeing, not just in this country, but around the world. And saying, how could people be so stupid? Well, actually, I think one of the things that we have to have the respect to recognise, it's not that people are stupid, they made a different choice, and we have to win the argument again for the values, for the way of life, for the future that we would like to see, learning from how that has been done in respect with people, not to people, I think is going to be a really key part of this, because this is bigger than all of us now. You know, that arc of the moral universe isn't bending, or isn't bending within our lifetime. And if we do want to pass on to our children a better world, a more prosperous world, and a more equal world, actually we have to put the work in now to find a way to make that work for the 21st century.
Yeah, and I think that idea of working with communities and talking to people and listening to people and humanizing situations. And for me, that's where, looking at Mo as well, you know, I used to watch the way that she could walk into a room of stuffy, generally men, and break through that and challenge the way that conversation was taking place and ask people to speak to one another as human beings. And I think more and more we're going to have to look at the way that we communicate with one another. Maria, have you got anything you want to add?
You just reminded me of something in relation to Mo Mowlam, about the story about her coming in, and it was a very stuffy room at that point. Most of the negotiators who negotiated the Good Friday Agreement were male, stale and beyond the pale, and very entrenched in their positions. But I do remember a story about her coming into a meeting with the DUP, with Ian Paisley, and she was too hot. She had a wig on, and taking off the wig and putting it on the table and taking off her shoes and putting her feet up, you know, and just completely unnerving everybody in the room, simply because, you know, obviously she was hot and uncomfortable, and also she probably was a bit mischievous and enjoyed the fact that she was able to unseat these people. And I do think it's a pertinent point, Stella, in relation to certainly the recent vote in America. That we may not be happy about it, but like it or not, people are entitled to vote for whoever they want to vote for. It doesn't mean that we have to like the candidate. It doesn't mean either that we need to excuse some of the hateful invective that has been used over the course of this campaign. For me, it is quite worrying, and I do tend to take things personally, no matter what country someone is in, when they do talk about sexual assault, because I have been a victim of it. So when you do talk about that sense of entitlement or right to someone of whatever gender, I find it absolutely horrific. And I won't be rushing off to the White House anytime soon. I wouldn't imagine that I'll get an invite anyway after criticising him. But I do want to tell a story. I missed a conference 2 days ago in Ireland. It was the Safe Ireland conference about domestic violence, and I'm going to have to refer to notes to this because I don't want to misquote the woman, but I picked up a national paper yesterday, the Irish Times, and it kind of recounted a story that had been told by Lynn Rosenhall, who, if anybody knows her, was the former advisor to the outgoing Vice President Joe Biden. And she spoke of being on a sailing course and learning how to sail a boat. And there were a number of them on the course, and the instructor unconsciously had deferred 2 males for the leading roles on this course. And she challenged him on it and said, you know, well, why are you doing this? We're females and we're here too, and went through the whole equality message, and he had apologised. It just hadn't entered his head at all that that's what he was doing. So when he brought the class together for the next session, he had referred to the boat's captain for that day, saying, well, whoever he or she may be. And one of his students spoke out from the back of the class and said, well, my wife will never be the captain. And the owner of that backward voice has just been elected President of the United States of America. So I do think there is a lot of work to do. Regardless of the administration around him, Donald Trump has his own values. And I think it's going to be quite difficult to shift that narrative in relation to both hope for women and also for minorities in that country. And I think it does have a knock-on effect then in relation to how he approaches foreign policy or how he negotiates across the country. So it is something that, while we should respect people for exercising their right to vote, it doesn't mean that we always necessarily have to respect the person who has been placed in that position.
Thank you. And that sort of leads on to one of my next questions, which is, and it's quite a big question, but how do you feel that we find a positive way forwards? Because I think once we reach these points, we have to move on to the next point, which is what do we do next? And what do you think women's role is in moving forwards?
I really think some kind of a strategy has to be think about. It's just an early stage yet, but we need some kind of reassurance. We have to continue first what we are doing as usual, and continue. But definitely there must be a coping mechanism that we have to develop within this. I will be going back to Somaliland in December again, and I don't know what impact it has already made. I can see from the social media, some of the young boys were just saying that he was a gender officer for one of the organizations himself, and then he was just said in one sentence. So America didn't vote for women. So where did that leave us? So that's hanging in there. I really don't know what he meant, but the impact it's made is still to be seen. Yeah, whether it's going to be more violence or whether it's going to be the woman already will be asked to go back to their homes, and I really don't know. It's still early, but.
So I think one of the challenges that we've got here is that people have never really trusted politicians. I mean, you go back, you look at the Hogarth kind of etchings about politicians being corrupt, but actually what we're facing now is something slightly different, which is a sense that even if I wasn't a lying bastard, I'll say that this time in the morning, could I really make a difference anyway? A sense of efficacy. Actually, is it worth the effort of collaborating? One of the reasons I think that people feel that is because we're seeing a world changing so very quickly before our eyes. That every generation has faced big challenges, but within our lifetime, I have jumpers that I think are older than the internet. If you think about how the world has changed so much just in the last decade, that is very unsettling. And the idea that a small group of people in wherever, I like to call the place I work Hogwarts gone wrong, but up in Hogwarts, is enough to cope with that and to be able to make sure that everybody can be part of that doesn't really make sense to people. So we absolutely need to build a new way of collaborating and a new way of working politically, because politics at its best is about how we come together to make choices. Within that, a politics that recognises the contribution that everybody can make, for me, is what progressive politics is about, is saying, actually, my life is better when I hear Rhoda's contribution, when I hear Maria's contribution, Hen's contribution, all of your contributions to what we're trying to do, because you make me think of different things that we can do better, has to be that foundation. It is harder to do if you don't acknowledge the inequality. One of the best things I think about the Obama administration is the story about the women in the Obama administration when they were in meetings repeating what the other woman had said, because they all knew the first time around the woman had said something, it wasn't heard. But if another woman echoed that woman, the message might start to get through. That is a message of solidarity. It's also a message of calling out the inequalities that you are facing. The honest truth right now is that women going into public life are facing that backlash. I draw my inspiration from Eleanor Roosevelt, who said that women are like tea bags. You don't know how strong they are until they're in hot water. But my appeal to the men in our lives is not to be the kettle. It's to think about actually how you can be that echo to say there is a different way of doing this. Yes, politics has to change. Yes, we're not working with people right now. We do have to work with people. The benefits to all of us when we do that are legion. But we have to do it in a way that also tackles that inequality that means we're at danger of missing out on that diversity that comes from having equality. So we have to tackle both things. There's the individual policy areas. Whether you voted for Brexit or whether you voted to remain, we have to sort out what happens next. But if we don't deal with that underlying culture, and if we don't recognise the importance of equality in that underlying culture, we will be poorer at making decisions, and actually that backlash will win.
And that's really key, isn't it? The fact that at the moment, because of what's happening, the instinct is to get back into your space and to pit yourself against whatever the perceived other is. And actually, it's not about us being different. It's not about men and women. It's not about Remain and Leave. It's not about Trump or Hillary. It's about saying, how do we work together and communicate with one another in a way to move this forwards?
Well, I'm very selfish. That's why I want equality, because I see that equality gets better things. So I'm selfish for my community, I'm selfish for my country, But we also have to recognise we haven't made that argument. Too often when we've talked about equality, too often we talked about getting women into politics, it's almost like you're doing women a favour.
Yeah.
Lads, we're doing you a favour by being in the room and talking with you, because together we're going to come up with better ideas. So we've got to have a political discourse that talks about the benefits of having that kind of conversation. That isn't easy. It is hot water. It is going to be contested. And that is why solidarity, which isn't always about agreeing, but is about saying, actually, I think that does need to be heard, so I'm going to use my power to be able to echo that. The only thing that makes me despair right now is talking to young campaigners who say, I see what's been happening to you guys and I think it's not worth the effort. We've got to convince people that it is worth the effort and put ourselves out there as partners to them to hear them to make that happen.
And I think also there's been a gap between and the disconnect between people who are generally perceived, and I hate this phrase, but as being on the ground, and what happens when it comes to local and then national and regional levels. And I think we need to get to a point where, you know, the woman sitting in her kitchen in Ballymurphy or in Birmingham's opinion is just as valued and just as important as Stella's or mine or Hen's or Rhoda's, you know. And I often think that maybe that might be why this country, and particularly England in relation to the Brexit campaign, and also the States in relation to Trump, has gone down the route that it is going in, because people, and we get this phrase again that I don't like, the ordinary people feel that they are being left behind on a journey that everybody else is travelling on, you know, but somewhere at the back that carriage has become unhinged and has gone off the rails and they've been forgotten about. And one of the ways that you can tackle that, and it's something that Mo did do when she came to negotiate the agreement, was she went into women's centres and she wasn't interested in speaking to the people in the ball gowns, you know, who were turning up for every event and taking their, we didn't have selfies at that time, but taking their pictures because they were sitting beside someone else who was perceived as being important. She spoke to people who were on the ground in residence committees and who had opinions all of their lives, you know, and who were quite able to articulate them, and they were just as important and sometimes more so than other people's. And that's what she did. She got in, she got stuck in on the ground around a pot of tea, and there are brilliant, brilliant photographs of her sitting in East Belfast around, you know, this kitchen table, small kitchen, with a lot of women who had never been recognised in the political arena at all, but actually who were doing most of the piecework on the ground before piecework became fashionable. So I think that's what we need to go back to. We need to go back to listening to people and to valuing people's judgments. And also we need to come off the high horse that sometimes it can become quite easy to be comfortable in whenever you do go into the political arena and you do forget about those young campaigners who are quite frankly frightened to become involved in something when they see the level of abuse and hard work and hard slog that it can be when you do get there.
Well, talking of listening, I've got a couple more questions, but I just wondered if anyone has any questions.
No, I think I would like to ask Rhoda, who is being very, very humble, to tell us a little bit more about the role she played during the demobilization of the militia in Somaliland, and also the role that women played when market women who were being harassed by young militia took over their chariots with the guns on it, pushed them into the sea.
Yeah, that was 1991, yeah.
And they said, I did not bring you up to point a gun at me. That gun is going into the sea. If you're going to remain to be my son, I will not have you with a gun. I think you played a very big role there. I know that because I witnessed it. You have been a role model in negotiations, in a lot of bringing women forward. You have been a role model as one of the first few women who had a degree. So tell us a bit more about that, please.
Oh, okay. It's really, there were, from 1991, when the country declared their own independence, and there was a lot of reconciliation and conferences that has to take place, and that was only men conferences. In fact, the clan leaders, the chiefs, and the elders were the ones who were all the time meeting, and each meeting takes place from 3 months to 6 months. in one village or there, and sometimes they didn't agree. And the role we really played at the time, where I was also responsible for mobilizing that, was for women to have a say in those conferences. Not only that they were really confronted with the militia that was there and thrown their weapons out, build the police stations. The first contributions they made was really build police stations in Hargeisa, in Burao, and in Berbera, so that they will be able to put those gangs in there for a while. They were also demonstrated and had rallies in front of the conferences places where the men were having, and they demanded they have to be allowed to speak. They were not allowed even to speak. And in 1993, when the Somaliland Charter was about to be developed, and in Borum, one of the towns in East London, the women stayed there, picketed actually, for about 10 days in front of the conference, asking them to give them just 3 minutes to talk to the conference, to address to the conference. And they have to come out each time. Are you still here? What are you doing? Are you still here? Yes, we are not going back until we have been given the chance to, really. And the first Somaliland women's organization, Al-Amin, it used to be In God We Trust, is actually the name, were the ones who were leading that. And finally they said, 3 of you can come. Only 3 of you, not all of you in here. 3 of you can come. And they were allowed really to come and say their word. And that changed it a lot, because the speech itself was so powerful that they have to say, we have been waiting for you 10 days, came from all over the regions of Somaliland, waiting for this. And the only reason is that we want peace. We want peace for our service, we want peace for our children. We want to have what anyone around the world is having, for our right to be able to work, to be able to send our children to school, to get rest, not thinking to again running back after 4 years. So really that was, and now somehow the next election, there are 2 women, only 1 woman in the Somaliland elders, Somaliland parliament, out of 82 men. We are campaigning now. One of the things that we are campaigning at the moment is for them to come to have at least 30% in the 2 houses of women. We have got 3 ministers, 2 ministers and 1 vice minister. Minister of Finance of Somaliland, in fact, is a woman itself. So we are getting there. We will get there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we're going to have to leave it here. I think there's trains to catch and people have got to get places. But I just want to say a massive thank you to all 3 of you for being here today and taking the time to talk about this with us. And I was going to ask one final question about what you would say to girls coming up in the future, but I'm very aware Stella needs to run. So I'm going to let Stella run, and I'm just going to ask Rhoda and Maria just to finish very quickly. We've got 2 minutes left with what advice you would give to emerging women in politics today.
I would really say keep going and be who you are first, and be always with the people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Two things I think I'd say to always that everybody has a unique experience and that they should always use their own experience in order to learn how to empathise with others. And the second thing is simply you can do it. You know, I'm not a believer of saying to someone, you know, oh, eventually you'll get there one day. You know, if you want to do it, get up and go and break down your own barriers and go for it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.